Welcome to the Refurbishment Mastery podcast with me, Martin Rapley. If you're a property investor who is worried about paying too much for your next property, concerned that you don't know how to manage a refurb, or scared that you will be ripped off by a builder, then this is for you. In this podcast, I share over 30 years of experience of managing refurbishments and conversions to help you make more profit, save your time, and ultimately enjoy the process. On with the podcast.
Hi guys, welcome to this episode of the podcast. The first of a little series of 4 that I'm going to do to commemorate my 40 years of working in the construction industry. It was September 1985 that I first started work with a building contractor. I'd left school in July, having done A-levels and decided that university wasn't the right route for me. And so I've got for you over these 4 episodes 40 tips that I have learned from over the years, and I'm sure you'll have heard me say some of these before, but there's some brand new things in here, and I'll also give you a little bit of background as to what led to those tips as well, rather than just rushing them straight off. So I'll do the first 10 in this episode. So, as I say, it was September 1985 that I first started in construction. I took a job with a construction company based in London. As you know, a lot of you know that I'm based in Kent, so London was easy for me to get to. And I took a job with a very, very well-established company. They're not around any longer, but they had a very, very good name, particularly in the city of London, for good quality, high-end kind of works. I hadn't been there that long before they moved me from the office onto a construction site, and the company I was working for had secured a project to build 24 luxury apartments out just off of King's Road in Chelsea, actually. And they sent me out there. It was a muddy hole in the ground when I got involved with it. And I had the benefit of being based on site for about 18 months whilst all of that was delivered. So I kind of saw a whole project go from start to finish within the first 2 years of being employed, and saw everything that went with it. But one of the massive learnings that came from this project was that you need to engage the right consultants on your project. And the story with this project was it was for an investment bank. It was a commercial bank that actually were putting up the funds to build this block of flat. And this, it turned out, was the first block of flats this client had ever built. Prior to this, they'd only taken existing properties and refurbished them and reconfigured them. They put together their team of consultants in the same way as they always did, with exactly the same consultants, and sadly found out partway through the project that the architect that had done plenty of successful projects for them previously didn't actually have much experience of designing new build properties, and particularly something as complex as a block of flats. And we were the building contractor on site. And what we kept finding was that there were problems with the design. The design didn't work. And there was some significant issues as far as keeping water out of a basement car park that actually, never really got solved. And so, the learning here is that if your consultants that you're engaging haven't got the right experience because they haven't done that kind of project before, then talk to and find other consultants. And I see that to some extent with HMOs even now, that some consultants really don't understand HMOs. They don't understand the regulations, and they massively over-design it, in my view, in a lot of cases, or indeed they miss out some fundamentals like fire alarm and things like that. So well worth finding consultants that know what they're talking about, rather than the same person that you might have used plenty of times before on other kinds of projects. They're not always right for everything. So that's the first tip: ensure that you employ the right consultants. I was based on that site for a long, as I say, for about 18 months or so, and then went off and started running another project. I was more experienced, but I was still a number two. I was still an assistant, and I got involved with running a project in St James's Street in London, about 50 yards from Clarence House, which at the time was where the Queen Mother lived. And I was running this project. We were doing an airspace development actually, and of course this is 1987, somewhere around about there, and so well before anyone knew about airspace development. And I was running this project with a lady who was my boss. She was the main surveyor on the project, and she decided to take a 3 week holiday partway through this project. Now, 2 weeks of that coincided with the Christmas shutdown. So there was an extra week where I was working and she wasn't. And she'd left me instructions of things to do during that week. And of course, it was restarting over after Christmas. So it wasn't a full on week. But during that week, she rang the office and she said to my head boss, my director at the time, that she decided that during her 3 week holiday, which actually was to Australia, she decided not to come back. So she was terminating her employment and not coming back again. So my boss said to me, "Oh, you'll be all right, Martin. You can just carry on running this project." And this was the first real opportunity, or the first real time I had of realizing that how powerful a mentor is. I had had someone that was looking after me. Now, I think I was doing quite a bit of the work, but she was leading me and steering me in the right direction. And without her, I was floundering around to a certain extent. And after a few weeks, I actually spoke to my director again and said, "Look, I'm struggling with this project. There was an awful lot of changes on there. There were a lot of technical issues, but there was a client that, in some respects, almost had too much money and just needed to spend it. And I was just getting bogged down in everything that was going on there. And so I spoke to my director, and my director said, "That's all right." He said, "You've worked with Simon before. I'll put you back with Simon. Simon can help you with this project." This was a guy called Simon George. Now, I have never ever met Simon George again after I left that business. Can't find him on LinkedIn or YouTube. He would now be well into his 60s. But he took me back under his wing, and I learned the benefit prior to him being involved because I'd been floundering around without a mentor. He took me back under his wing and really honed me into a good surveyor. What it actually turned out that I wasn't in as many problems as I thought I was, but the learning really is that if you want to be good at something, you do need a mentor to teach you, to guide you, and to teach you all of the little clever things. And that's exactly what Simon taught me at the time. So that's tip number two, is that you really benefit from having a mentor. Now, because I'd been struggling with this project, and I didn't really, I kind of knew what I was doing, but I just didn't know quite how to make it work properly. One of the things I had been doing was writing down everything that had been happening. So when Simon came and came back and started working with me and became my mentor again, I was able to show him all of these notes that I'd taken. And the key thing was, as a result, even though I hadn't been totally clear what I was doing with these notes, I had written a lot of stuff down. And so when I had a mentor to work with me again, it was very easy to go through these notes and get guidance and support as to how to deal with each of the things that had been going on site. So I've learned that ever since. And I still say that to people even now. You can never take enough notes on what's going on. Whether you think things are going smoothly, take notes. If you think things are going badly, take notes, because you've always got something to refer back to. And I have to say, the number of times where over my career things have got a little bit close to taking legal advice, And I've never ended up in court or anything like that, but we've had issues where we've had to follow the contractual route. And what lets you down is if you haven't got the notes, and what cements a likely good case for you is if you have got the notes. So, always take notes of everything you're thinking, everything you're doing, whether it's good or bad. Having some notes to hand means that if you need help from someone later on, you can actually go back and refer to them, and you've got some reasoning as to what you were thinking, what you were doing at the time. I ran a number of other projects and got involved with a number of other projects for that business, but I ended up leaving there in the end because I fancied a bit of traveling, and actually I went to America, traveled in America for 3.5 months, worked in summer camps, in the children's summer camps, and did some touring on the East Coast in the Greyhound buses. And when I came back to the UK, the construction industry was absolutely booming. And I went for interviews. By then I wasn't qualified. I'd got some college experience, but I wasn't really qualified. But I had quite a bit of experience by then. It was 4.5 years, nearly 5 years later, actually. So it wasn't difficult to get offers of jobs, and the industry was booming. In fact, I was turning down jobs because I didn't like the car they'd offered me, because there were just so many jobs out there. I took a job through someone I knew through college. His company were employing, and ended up going to a new business, and started working, of course, with completely different people, and was started working on slightly different kinds of projects, slightly smaller projects, and for different end clients. So it was really good experience. I'd done a lot of high end work for good quality blue chip clients in the first company. This second company did a lot of work for the local authorities. So I'd gone from high end to, I'm not saying bottom end, but a different kind of client base. A lot of work was in the East End of London, and it was first real experience for me, working in some of the council-owned stock in those areas, where a lot of people weren't English speaking, and and for me it was really exciting going and meeting some of these people. You go into some of their properties, there was these great curries being cooked and all sorts of foreign foods being cooked. So it was a real change of environment for me. I started working with a fellow. We were looking after a project actually in Greenwich, so just south of, on the southeast part of London. And we were working for Greenwich Council, and I was working with this fellow. It was a relatively easy project for me as a surveyor, and I was working with this guy Malcolm, who was the manager of the project. And what really struck me about Malcolm was he was a lovely fella. Talked to everyone, knew everything about everyone, and kind of it was a real eye opener for me, because that wasn't me. I was reasonably quiet, and he kind of got me out of my shell to a certain extent. But the more I worked with him, the more I realised was that he talked because he didn't actually know what he was doing, and that he actually couldn't really manage things particularly well. And he used talk to cover up. And so the thing that I learned from that was that, first of all, you've got to be aware of people who talk too much, because they could be covering up their inefficiencies, as this fella was. And the other thing I realised from that, which isn't actually written down here as a top tip, but is a tip that has just come to mind. So you've got a bonus one here, is that I could learn a huge amount by not saying too much. By listening to other people, I could learn a huge amount. And if I look back over my career since, I've not said lots, but I've listened intently. I've taken notes, as I was talking about, and managed to sort out a lot of issues that could have become a lot more complicated had I not been the quiet one, as it were. So do be careful of anyone who talks too much. Is my next tip. I got involved with a project. We were managing a refurbishment or external refurbishment of a block of flats up in North London somewhere. And I was working with a contracts manager whose role was to deliver the project. He had a manager on site, and I was looking after the finances. And this is one of the first projects that I started to do, properly on my own without really having a mentor. And the building we were working on had external problems with the fabric. There were lots of cracks. There was stonework that was falling to pieces, and we needed to repair all of that work. And partway through, some other fairly extensive work came to light, that needed doing. And we merrily got our contractors on site to carry on doing all of this work. And we didn't know how much this work was going to cost. And we just merrily get on and do the work. And then later on, I'm talking to the client's quantity surveyor about the cost of the work. And the client's saying, hold on, I can't afford that. That was way more than I ever expected that work to be. Why is it so expensive? And I said, well, we kind of cut every problem that we've got is different, and we haven't agreed a price with the builder's just getting on and doing it. And as a result, we got the summary was we got to the end of the project, and the client said, I can't afford to pay you all of that money. You've spent all of this money on my property, but you never agreed the price with me before getting on with the work. So as a result, the client couldn't afford, and in fact, the client ended up winding up their business. And quite what happened with the property, I don't know. But the client ended up winding up their business, and we as a business were out of pocket. We as a business lost somewhere in the region of what I think was £70,000 because we'd done loads of extra work. We had exceeded what the client expected to spend. I hadn't told the client the full cost because I didn't really know the full cost. And as a result, we were out of pocket. Let's jump in to make sure that you have everything you need. Now, in a number of these podcasts, you would have heard me talk about my community. And I want to ensure that you know how you can join that community. Obviously, within these podcasts, there's a limit to the detail I can go into the recording. And of course, a lot of things are very generic. So what if you had access to join me on a Zoom call for 90 minutes every single week in a group coaching environment? You could get your questions answered whenever they come up and learn from other members' questions. Plus, you also get 10 hours of training videos, an HMO refurbishment case study, some sample documents and checklists that will help you run your projects far more effectively. Membership of my community is just £89 a month. You get the first month free, and you can also cancel anytime after that. Plus, as a listener of this podcast, there's a promo code to help you save £20 every single month that you remain a member. So just make a note of VIP discount 20, VIP discount 20, all in capital letters, and put that into the checkout. You'll find the checkout on my website, www.refurbishmentmastery.com. Scroll down the page, you'll find the link for the Project Management Accelerator. Use the promo code VIP discount 20 and you'll be signed up at just £69 a month. We look forward to seeing you in that community very, very soon. Now back to the podcast. So the learning here is you must keep on top of costs. You must keep on top of any costs that your builder tells you. You must keep on the costs of variations, because if the builder goes belly up, there's no one to recover the money from. In our case, it was our client that went belly up, so there was no way for us to be paid. And that was one of the very few projects I've ever got involved with that have lost money. I have probably been involved with a few others that have lost money, but nowhere near as significant as that. And that was because the builder, we think in the end, probably wound their business up to avoid the costs. but we never got paid at the end of the day. So make sure you are always in control of the costs of anything you're doing, and don't be afraid to stop your builder to have that discussion, because had the client stopped us earlier, we would have obviously had to put everything on the table and told them the true cost. Um, Shortly after that, the construction industry took a massive turn for the worse, and lots of people were laid off. I wasn't in the first tranche of redundancies in the business, fortunately, but I was in the second tranche, and I was given notice of redundancy. And at the time, there was no other work in the construction industry. I hadn't actually got any other work to go to. We were 2 days short of my notice expiring, and the managing director called me in and he said, "Martin, I might have another angle for you here. That I might need someone to look after a project that we've won." But he said you would have to learn some different methods and some different forms of contract, and these were a bit more specialist kinds of projects. So he said, if you're prepared to pivot, then I can rescind your redundancy. I can take away your redundancy. So I said, well, actually, if you want me to sweep the floor, if it avoids redundancy, I'll learn how to sweep the floor. And so as a result, I pivoted. And so there's the tip: be prepared to pivot if necessary. And I pivoted it into more specialist kinds of projects, which was term contract and term maintenance type work. And these are the contracts where we were engaged as a builder, sometimes for up to 5 years, on standard schedules of prices to deliver work. And the advantage of those kinds of projects is that your client can instruct you way, way quicker, because the prices are against a standard book of prices. I did a number of those projects for a good long time after that, probably another 6 years or so, and got really good at those kinds of projects. They needed very close management, an element of micromanagement to deliver them. There was a lot of volume going through the system. Everything had to be remeasured, and it made money if you ran it well. If you didn't manage it well, they would go off the rails very easily. And I found that my style of management really suited those kinds of projects. One of the first projects I was running, in fact, the first project I was given on that new format was in the Maritime Museum in Greenwich again. So back into Greenwich, looking after a project in the Maritime Museum. We had a team of builders on site who would carry out running repairs and day-to-day maintenance in the museum. So toilets that were blocked, we'd have a team there, and the plumber would go in and unblock the toilet, and gutters that were leaking, we'd do that, and things like all the benches around the park, they all had to be maintained and painted and looked after. So we had a good team of people there. And what I learned was that what we actually had to do was we had to invoice every single little project, ideally within a 2-week period. So the toilet gets blocked, our plumber would go and unblock it. I would need to do the invoice within 2 weeks, and we'd get some premiums if we due to emergency call outs and things like that. And what I realized was that most of these small projects, my client was not really looking at the invoices. My client was interested in his big budget. He had a maintenance budget of however many hundreds of thousands of pounds. And as long as my guys on site were kept busy, he knew what the labour side of it and it was, and he knew that there'd be some materials on top of that. And what I started to realize was that a lot of these small projects, he wasn't checking the detail. So had we fixed the emergency call out to fix the toilet? Yes, he was delighted, because the museum had delivered their service to their guests, their tourists that were coming and seeing the museum. Was he looking at our detail? No. So if in fixing that toilet, I charged him a few bits of material here, there, and everywhere, he never checked it. He never verified all of that. And what I realized was that on every single plumbing job we ever did, some of you that know a bit more about plumbing will have heard of PTFE tape. It's very thin white tape that plumbers wind round junctions to make sure that there is a water seal when they tie joint nuts up on plumbing things. And now, back in those days, a roll of PTFE tape was probably not 15 pence. And you know how, you can imagine how many plumbing junctions we could do with a roll of PTFE tape. We could, I don't know how many it was, but 30, 40, 50 of them. What I used to do was charge 5p of PTFE tape on every single plumbing job we did. And all of those 5p's mounted up. What I'd also do is every time we did a project and we could salvage any materials, we'd take them back to our store. And when we fixed another project, we would use something that came from our store, and I would charge as a brand new item. This is obviously subject to it working. So what I realized was actually we made good money on that project because I looked after the pennies. It wasn't necessarily big picture. Actually looking after the pennies, making sure that I charge my client for absolutely everything and probably more. And now I'm on the other side. I'm saying, watch out for some of those little things that your builders are going to charge you for, because they may not be legitimate, because some of the things I was doing wasn't actually legitimate. But also look after your own pennies, because those pennies do mount up in the longer term. I relocated to an office in South London, just outside Croydon, because we won work for Croydon Council, and I was running a 3-year contract of looking after Croydon Council stock. Now, this is in the days when the councils had enormous stock. And a lot of their property is similar to what we've now got as property investors. One of the things I learned from working with Croydon Council was how important it was to maintain their properties. By and large, their properties were in good condition because they maintained them on a regular basis. We used to do external repainting of their properties every 5 years. So they painted every single property externally every 5 years, and they painted inside of their properties. They would do I think every 8 years was the regime on those. So their tenants were living in pretty good properties, but as a result, their properties were in pretty good condition because they did have these cyclical maintenance regimes on them. Think about your properties. How often do you maintain your properties? You may well have done a full refurbishment after you bought the property, but how much maintenance do you do? Ongoing management and maintenance do you do in the longer term? It is definitely difficult around tenants, but we used to do it around tenants. We would redecorate the inside of their property whilst they were living in it, one room at a time. And it would take a bit of time, but we could do that. So the other learning here is you will see that as a result, some ex-local authority stock is actually good quality opportunities to be buying because they were looked after very well at the time. Now, the other thing I learned from working with the council, as well as the need to maintain your properties, is that the one thing the council were really keen on was that we didn't just put sticky tape over a problem. They wanted to know and understand deeper rooted problems in their properties. So it wasn't keep going back and fixing something. If we were sent to fix something, they would want us to report back and say, is this fix going to be the problem, or do we actually need to replace something? And sadly, some of these properties didn't get looked after particularly well by the tenants. We would be, back in the day, I can remember the same addresses came up all of the time. They've had one problem, then they've had a door fall off its hinges, then they've had a window broken. And you've perhaps unfortunately got some of these tenants and some of these properties where these things keep happening. What they wanted us to feed back, and we'd have regular meetings with their team, was, what could we do to stop this door breaking? Or is the door breaking because actually it's the frame that is rotted and the frame won't fix into the frame properly? So now the doors, the hinges are falling out all of the time. And so the other thing I learned from the council was when things aren't right with your properties, look a little bit deeper. what is the true cause of that problem, and can you solve the cause of the problem? And to a certain extent, this is one of the reasons we took the management of our properties back from a letting agent. We wanted to manage the tenants. We were paying a lot, and we wanted to bring that back in house. But the other thing I've seen is that some of those letting agents, and not all letting agents, and sometimes they don't even know and understand. Sometimes the problems are just taped over with a bit of sticky tape or a bit of plaster, when really you need to go and look at your properties and actually understand from a deeper perspective what is the actual cause of the problem that you've got. And it might be that you need to do something more radical. Perhaps you need to give a tenant a notice and move the tenants out to refurbish the property again, or repair something more significant. Or perhaps there is just a bigger problem there. And instead of and the common thing is that I see a lot is we've got some damp. And I talk to people all the time that have got some damp in their properties. So we've rubbed it all down and we've painted it. And we've rubbed it all down and we've painted it. And 6 months later, we've rubbed it all down and we've painted it. At some point, you need to deal with that fundamental root problem. And once you've done that, yes, you'll spend a little bit more money now, but you shouldn't have to paint it ever again for the next 8, 10 years or so. And that will help you in the longer term. So that was tip number 9. And then for this podcast, tip number 10, I was working with a fella. He was all right, but he was very, very good with emergency call-outs. And I talked about emergency call-outs. And he was really good with the people who called us, and he was really good following up. And then one day, it was probably about 5:45 at night. We were still working, and a phone call came in from one of our clients, which was actually a building society, and they came into the office, and we wouldn't normally have answered the phone, but this guy picked the phone up, and he's on the other end of the phone is this property manager from a building society that was not far up the road from us, 20 minutes up the road from us. They'd had an armed robbery that afternoon. Could we get together a team that could actually go to the building society and board up the front window and the door and anything else that was dealt with? The police had got everything sorted out. So this guy I was working with, he rings round, he gets people together, gets a team up there, and by now it's 6:30 at night, and he's got this team up there, and they found some materials. Where he got the materials from, I don't know, but he found some materials, and he boards up the windows, and he makes things safe, and as a result, got some very good feedback from the building society the following day, the following week, and got recognised for how well he dealt with the whole thing. And I was thinking about this whole incident, and I realised that the project that he'd been managing up until now, he almost turned everything into a crisis. He didn't proactively manage things. He waited until it was a bit last minute, turned it into a crisis, and then did well managing it. And what I realized was actually every project was costing way more than it should do, because he wasn't properly managing things in the time he allowed. He kind of waited for it to become a crisis and then swooped in like Batman or Superman and solved the crisis. There is no doubt he was an excellent manager in a crisis situation, probably better than me. I don't work overly well in a crisis. I'm one of those people that manage things in the time I've got. So be careful of, work out what you're good at, of course, but crisis management will cost you in the longer term. Try and avoid it. It's a great skill to have, but try and avoid the crisis in the first place by managing your projects to fit in to the process that I'm teaching and I'm talking about, and the timeframes that you've got. Try and avoid anything ever being a crisis. So there we go. There's the first 10 of 40 tips to celebrate my 40th anniversary in property for you. The next 10 will be in the next podcast episode that will be released again next Thursday, as they always are. I look forward to seeing you and speaking to you on that episode.
Thanks for listening to this podcast. Please do like, share and leave a comment where you can. If you need any guidance or advice with anything to do with your refurbishments or conversions, then don't hesitate to reach out. You can book a free call with me by clicking on the link at the top of my website, refurbishmentmastery.com. There's other ways you can contact me in the show notes as well. I look forward to speaking to you again soon.